"Charlie, this table is for family. You can find a spot outside." My cousin laughed as the others grinned. The waiter dropped a $2,800 bill in front of me. I took a sip of my coffee and chuckled. They had no idea who was covering it tonight. Let me back up 6 months. That's when everything started falling apart. Or maybe that's when I finally saw my family for who they really were. My tech startup had just been acquired by a major corporation for $42 million. The news hadn't gone public yet, and I'd kept quiet about it, wanting to process everything privately first. During those same 6 months, I'd been watching my family's true colors emerge. My cousin, who everyone called the golden child of our extended family, had been systematically excluding me from family gatherings. Birthday parties, holiday dinners, even my own grandmother's funeral planning meetings. Somehow the invitations never reached me. When I'd show up anyway, I'd get those looks. The ones that said I didn't belong. The breaking point came at my uncle's retirement party 2 weeks ago. I'd driven 3 hours to attend, only to find out they'd moved the venue at the last minute. Everyone knew except me. I spent 40 minutes in an empty restaurant before my younger sister finally called to tell me where everyone actually was. By the time I arrived, dinner was over, and my cousin made sure everyone knew how I'd abandoned the family celebration. That night, I made a decision. If they wanted to play games, I'd play games. But I'd play to win. I started planning immediately. First, I researched the most expensive restaurant in the city, a place called Meridian that required reservations months in advance and had a sommelier who charged more for wine pairings than most people made in a week. Then I had my assistant call, posing as a major food blogger, and somehow secured us a table for 12 on short notice. The invitation went out 3 days ago. I told everyone I wanted to make amends for missing so many family events, and that dinner would be my treat. My treat. I made sure to emphasize that part multiple times in the group text. Everyone accepted immediately. Apparently free expensive food was enough to overcome their recent cold shoulder treatment. I arrived early and spoke with the manager, a thin man with silver hair who understood exactly what I needed. I explained the situation carefully, and he nodded with the kind of knowing smile that suggested he'd seen family drama play out in his restaurant before. Everything was arranged. My family began arriving at 7 sharp. My cousin strutted in wearing a new suit, probably bought specifically for this occasion. My aunt and uncle followed, along with my sister, 2 more cousins, and several family friends who'd somehow gotten included. 12 people total, just as planned. The first hour went surprisingly well. Everyone was on their best behavior, probably because the restaurant's atmosphere demanded it. Crystal chandeliers, leather-bound menus with no prices, waiters who moved like dancers. This was the kind of place where conversations naturally became quieter and more refined. My cousin ordered the Wagyu beef. My aunt chose the lobster thermidor. Uncle went for the chef's tasting menu. They were ordering like people who'd never seen prices like these before, which they hadn't. I sat back and watched, occasionally nodding encouragement when someone hesitated over an expensive selection. The wine came next. The sommelier appeared with recommendations that started at $300 per bottle. My cousin, playing the role of family patriarch as usual, told him to bring us something really special, something that would make the night memorable. The sommelier's eyes lit up, and I had to hide my smile. 2 bottles became 4. 4 became 6. The table grew louder, more relaxed. Stories started flowing. Laughter filled the space between courses. For a moment, I almost forgot why I was really here. This felt like the family dinners I remembered from childhood, before politics and money and petty jealousies had poisoned everything. Then the moment arrived. We were finishing dessert when my cousin suddenly stood up, wine glass in hand. He wanted to make a toast, he announced. Everyone quieted down, expecting something sentimental. Instead, he looked directly at me and said that while he appreciated me organizing this dinner, he thought it was time everyone acknowledged the elephant in the room. He said I'd been distant lately, missing important family events, and that it was creating tension for everyone. He suggested that maybe I needed to decide whether I was really committed to being part of this family. The table went silent. My aunt nodded approvingly. My uncle looked uncomfortable, but didn't disagree. Even my sister avoided my eyes. My cousin continued, saying that this dinner was a nice gesture, but gestures weren't enough anymore. He said the family needed reliability, not someone who showed up when it was convenient. Then came the line that sealed his fate. He told me that this table was for family, real family, and maybe I'd be more comfortable finding a spot outside. The others started grinning. Someone stifled a laugh. They thought this was hilarious, the black sheep getting publicly dressed down at his own dinner party. That's when the waiter appeared with the bill. $2,800, placed directly in front of me as planned. My cousin's grin widened as he realized what was happening. They thought I was about to be stuck with a massive bill after being humiliated, the perfect capstone to their power play. I took a sip of my coffee and chuckled. Then I stood up, reached into my jacket, and pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app, the one connected to the account that now held $42 million, and showed the screen to my cousin. His face went white. I told him he was absolutely right about family being important. Real family supports each other, includes each other, treats each other with respect. I said I'd learned a lot about who my real family was over the past 6 months, and unfortunately, most of the people at this table hadn't made the cut. I called the waiter over and handed him my black card. Then I told everyone at the table that this would indeed be my treat, just as promised. But it would also be the last time I'd be picking up a check for people who'd made it clear I wasn't welcome at their table. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. My aunt tried to backtrack, saying my cousin had been joking, that everyone was just having fun. My uncle suddenly wanted to discuss a business opportunity he'd been meaning to mention. My sister reached for my arm, saying we should talk privately. I pulled up the group text on my phone and deleted myself from it right there in front of everyone. Then I blocked each of their numbers one by one while they watched. The clicking sound seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet restaurant. I told them they were absolutely right that I didn't belong at their table anymore. But the difference was, now I was choosing to leave. I'd spent months being excluded from their gatherings, and I'd finally realized it was the best thing that could have happened to me. The waiter returned with my card and receipt. $2,800 for a lesson that was worth every penny. I signed it, left a generous tip, and stood to leave. My cousin finally found his voice. He asked what I was doing, where I was going. He said we could work this out. That family was more important than pride. I looked around the table one more time. These people who'd raised me, celebrated with me, shared holidays and birthdays and milestones. People I'd loved unconditionally for 32 years, right up until the moment I realized that love wasn't being returned. I told him I was going to build a new life with people who actually wanted me in it. People who wouldn't exclude me from family events or mock me at dinner tables or treat basic respect like a privilege I had to earn over and over again. Then I walked out of Meridian and into the best decision I'd ever made. Update 1. The aftermath started immediately. Before I'd even reached my car, my phone was buzzing with calls and texts from numbers I'd forgotten to block. Family friends, distant relatives, even people I barely knew were suddenly reaching out to check on me and see if I was okay. Word traveled fast in our family network. Within hours, everyone knew about the dinner, the bill, and my dramatic exit. But more importantly, they'd heard about the money. News of my startup's acquisition had somehow leaked, probably through my cousin who'd spent the ride home frantically Googling my company name. My sister showed up at my apartment the next morning. She'd been crying, and she looked exhausted. She said everyone was in chaos, that the family was falling apart, that I needed to fix this. I made coffee and let her talk. She went through the whole guilt routine, how I was tearing the family apart, how everyone was hurt and confused, how this wasn't who I was. She said my cousin was devastated, that he'd been drunk and said things he didn't mean, that I was being cruel by cutting everyone off. I listened to all of it, then asked her a simple question. I wanted to know why, in 6 months of me being excluded from family events, she'd never once stood up for me. Why she'd never called to make sure I knew about venue changes or canceled plans. Why she'd sat silently while my cousin publicly humiliated me, right up until the moment she realized I had money. She couldn't answer that. I told her I loved her, that she was welcome in my life anytime she wanted to build a genuine relationship. But I was done with the family dynamics where my worth was determined by how useful I could be to everyone else. She left crying, but she left. The calls continued for weeks. My aunt wanted to explain that it had all been a misunderstanding. My uncle suddenly remembered several business ventures we should discuss. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years were calling to catch up and see how I was doing. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They'd start with concern for my well-being, move into explanations of why the dinner had been a misunderstanding, and eventually land on subtle hints about investment opportunities or loans, or just general ways I could help family out. I had the same response for everyone. I told them I was doing great, that cutting toxic people out of my life had been incredibly liberating, and that I wished them well. Then I'd end the call. Update 2. 3 months later, I got an invitation to my cousin's wedding. The same cousin who'd told me to find a spot outside the family table. The invitation was hand-delivered by his fiancée, who I'd met maybe twice in 5 years. She explained that my cousin had been going through a really hard time since our dinner. He'd been drinking more, having trouble at work, and their relationship was strained. She said he'd been too proud to call me directly, but he wanted me at the wedding. He needed his family there. I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. I told her I appreciated her coming by, but I wouldn't be attending. I explained that I'd moved on from that chapter of my life and was much happier for it. She pressed, saying families fight, but they always come back together. That forgiveness was important. I asked her if she knew what had happened at the dinner. She admitted she only knew my cousin's version, that there'd been a misunderstanding over a restaurant bill, and that I'd overreacted and cut everyone off. So I told her the truth. About the months of exclusion, the missed invitations, the casual cruelty that had built up to that night. About being told I wasn't real family, that I should find a spot outside. About how no one had defended me or questioned the treatment until they found out I had money. Her face changed as she listened. She asked why my cousin had told her something completely different. I said that was a question she should ask him. She left without pushing further, but I could see she was thinking. The wedding happened without me. I sent a card with my regrets and spent that weekend hiking with friends I'd made through a photography group. People who barely knew my last name, let alone my bank balance, but who'd become more family to me in 3 months than my blood relatives had been in years. I heard later that the wedding was smaller than expected. Apparently, several family members had started having their own conversations about the dinner incident, and some uncomfortable truths had come to light. My sister told me that my cousin's best man had pulled out at the last minute after learning more details about how I'd been treated. Update 3. 6 months after the dinner, I was having coffee with my neighbor when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. I almost didn't answer. It was my grandmother. She was 93, lived in assisted living, and had somehow gotten hold of my new number. Her voice was shaky but determined. She said she'd been hearing stories about family drama and wanted to know what was really going on. So I told her everything. The whole story, from beginning to end. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that hit me harder than anything my cousin had said at that dinner. She told me she was proud of me. She said she'd raised her children to be better than this, and she was ashamed of how they'd treated me. She said family wasn't supposed to be conditional, wasn't supposed to come with tests and requirements and hoops to jump through. Real family, she said, was supposed to be the place you could always count on, not the place where you had to prove your worth over and over again. She asked if I could come visit her. I drove out the next weekend. She was friendlier than I remembered, but her mind was sharp as ever. We spent hours talking about everything, my business, my new friends, my plans for the future. She wanted to hear about the photography group, the hiking trips, the volunteer work I'd started doing at an animal shelter. As I was leaving, she handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a check for $5,000. The letter explained that this was my inheritance from her. She was giving it to me now, while she could see me enjoy it, rather than making me wait until after she was gone. But more than that, she wanted me to know that she understood what I'd done and why I'd done it. She wrote that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't value you, even when those people are family. Especially when those people are family. She also mentioned that several other family members had been coming to visit her lately, asking questions about my new financial situation and whether she thought I might be willing to help out with various problems. She told them all the same thing, that I was building a new life and they should respect that. I kept that letter. It sits framed on my desk, next to a photo from a recent hiking trip with friends who like me for who I am, not what I can do for them. Epilogue. It's been a year now since the dinner at Meridian. I've built a life I actually enjoy, surrounded by people who include me not because they have to or because I'm useful to them, but because they want me there. I bought a house in a different part of town. I travel when I want to. I've started a foundation that provides microloans to small businesses, something that brings me more satisfaction than any family dinner ever did. My photography has improved dramatically, and I'm planning a gallery showing next spring. My grandmother passed away 4 months ago. I was with her, along with 2 nurses who'd become like daughters to her, and a priest she'd known for 40 years. My biological family showed up for the funeral, of course. They sat in the front row and accepted condolences like they'd been devoted grandchildren all along. I sat in the back with my chosen family, the hiking group, my neighbor, some volunteers from the animal shelter. After the service, my cousin approached me. He looked older, tired. He said we should talk, that grandmother would have wanted us to work things out. I told him he was probably right. Grandmother would have wanted us to work things out. But working things out requires both sides to acknowledge what went wrong and commit to doing better. I said I'd learned over the past year that I couldn't control what other people did, but I could control what I accepted in my life. He asked what that meant. I explained that it meant I was no longer available to be the family scapegoat, the one who got excluded until I was needed, the one who was expected to prove my worth constantly, while everyone else's value was assumed. I said I'd found people who valued me consistently, and that was where I was investing my time and energy now. He stood there for a moment, probably trying to figure out if this was negotiable. Finally, he asked if there was anything he could do to fix this. I told him there was, actually. He could build genuine relationships with people based on mutual respect and care, not convenience and utility. He could examine why he'd felt comfortable treating me the way he had, and make sure he never treated anyone else that way. He could become the kind of person others would want in their lives, not the kind they tolerated out of obligation. But none of that involved me anymore. The last thing I said to him was that I hoped he figured it out, for his own sake and for the people in his life who deserved better. Then I walked away, surrounded by friends who'd driven 3 hours just to support me at my grandmother's funeral, people who'd never asked me for anything except my company. That night, back at my house, we ordered pizza and shared stories about my grandmother. These friends who'd never met her listened as I talked about her garden, her terrible cooking, her way of making everyone feel special. They understood that this was how I wanted to grieve, not with people who'd shown up out of obligation, but with people who'd shown up out of love. The $2,800 dinner at Meridian was the best money I ever spent. Not because of the food or the wine or the elegant atmosphere, but because it bought me clarity. It showed me exactly where I stood with people I'd been trying to please my entire life, and it freed me to build something better. Sometimes people ask if I miss my family. The honest answer is that I miss the family I thought I had, the one that existed in my imagination where blood meant something more than shared DNA. But I don't miss the family I actually had, the one where love came with conditions and respect had to be constantly earned. I have a new family now. We chose each other, and we keep choosing each other every day. We include each other in our celebrations, support each other through difficult times, and treat each other with the kind of consistent care that should be baseline in any relationship worth having. And when we go out to dinner, everyone pays their own bill. Not because we don't care about each other, but because our relationships aren't built on who can provide what. They're built on genuine affection, mutual respect, and the simple pleasure of each other's company. That, it turns out, is worth far more than $2,800. It's worth everything. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.